Well, welcome back to the shop in the basement today. I had a few questions on the Hyperspark setup and what we had to do to get that to fit. So I got the OEM one sitting here, got a spare Hyperspark that I had. The other one's still on the rig. But we'll do a quick walkthrough of what we got to do to get these to fit on the old 2F. But enough chatter, let's get at it. So this is the factory distributor. There is no lip. They've got like a pinch collar that sits there, and then they got an O-ring that goes down in the block. This is the factory Toyota gear. Spline goes I guess up and to the left, so she runs that direction. As far as this distributor goes, like I say, it sits down to about there. There are some interesting differences. So the Hyperspark that I have here is the Jeep 258 version, I believe. It's that 565307 model number. Obviously the gear's the wrong direction. It's spline the other way. They do make a Chevy i6 one now. I think the modifications are pretty similar. I have not laid my mitts on the Chevy version. The only thing I noticed looking at the diagrams and stuff online, I think the gear does not have that lip on the top. So that dimension is a little bit different, and the gear is closer to the Toyota gear where the splines go the direction we need. This is the direction we need for the Toyota 2F. This is the Jeep 258. It's the wrong way. So a couple nuances there. Otherwise, what ends up happening, at least with the Jeep 258, is the dimension from basically the bottom of the distributor shaft where it sits in the oil pump up to where it would clear in the block. So basically this dimension of where it would sit is a little bit longer than what the Hyperspark gives you. So from this lip, especially when you put the little thin gasket down to this oil tang, is off by about 1/8 of an inch. It's not a ton. So basically this shaft needs to get slid down. The nice thing is these are very simple distributors. I've got it pulled apart right now. But basically all there is a shutter wheel that sits on top here. And this shaft spins the shutter wheel for the Hall effect sensor. So I just pull that off. And the nice thing is there's basically just one moving part, aka this big giant shaft that runs down the middle. They've got one small kind of thrust washer up on the top, and then they've got a thicker one, this brass looking one, and then they've got a typical adjustable shim washer on the bottom. And that's what they ran to get your kind of clearances there. So nothing super crazy. The nice thing is this dimension basically from, I'm not actually measuring them right now, but I did. Basically the dimension from the gear set to the oil pump matches the OEM Toyota. So this dimension is good. It's just that it needs to get pushed down a little bit and have a little bit thicker spacer. Like I say, it should be about 1/8 of an inch, which is about the thickness of like this flange here. So it's not a ton. The nice thing is there is a little bit of extra room up top here. This is just kind of a press fit aluminum sleeve. And all it does is holds the rotor on up top. And there's plenty of meat. So the nice thing is, because we're only pushing it down 1/8 inch, what you can do is heat this up, drive that down 1/8 of an inch, which gives us the correct dimension out the bottom then, to match our Toyota OEM figure. But the side effect is basically you need like I say, it's like right about 1/8 inch. I'd have to, my measurements are upstairs at the desk. But you basically need to make a spacer, which is interesting because if you look at some of the aftermarket HEI units, the gears they ship with actually have about 1/8 of an inch flange up top. So I think that's probably how they're modifying some of those Chevy HEI distributors as well. More so like the aftermarket kind of weird eBay ones, but I'll throw a picture up. But yeah, the gear has just that little bit of a push to it. So what I'm going to do is work to basically take a piece of this round stock that I got and cut that spacer to the right size, which will basically just push that gear down to where we need it. So it's probably going to be the easiest way to do it, and then you use the small washers to shim it out back to what you need. The other quirk to it, at least on the 2F that I have, this shaft on the Jeep version, so this again is the Jeep 258, not the Chevy i6. I think the Chevy i6 one is the same. The dimension of the actual shaft through the distributor, this is a 1/2 inch, so 0.500. This is like 0.495. It is just a little bit smaller. I'm assuming it's probably some metric number. But the Toyota gear does not fit on the shaft here. And while you'd think the easy route would be just to ream out this gear, the oil pump, at least on my 76 2F, is the same, that if you don't bring this shaft down a little bit, it won't fit into the oil pump when you drop it in. So really the better route is to leave the gear the same and just turn this shaft down. It's basically a few thousandths. It's not a lot, just enough to get this gear to slip on. So I don't even think it's 1/100th. It's basically just a few thousandths that you got to drop it down, and only up to where the gear goes. So it's just this bottom, whatever that is, 3 inches. So the nice thing is, again, it's pretty simple mechanically. If you take those guys out and lay it here, this shaft is easy enough to chuck up and knock down this bottom. So she'll fit in the oil pump and she'll fit the Toyota gear. And this is pretty easy to knock down and work to the right thickness to get that 1/8 inch of a step. And then from there, it's just a matter of getting this guy relocated, but they move pretty easy. So I'm going to take these guys out to the shop, see what we can do. Same with this guy. See if we can get that bottom nibbled down just a skosh, and we'll probably bring you back. So see what we can do. So nothing too crazy. I got this bottom part spun down. You only have to catch that lower part. It does take the kind of black finish off where it was kind of hardened and plated, or anodized maybe. But it's going to be hanging around in oil, so it's not too big of a worry. The OEM Toyota gear fits on. You can see she's got a bit of a gap even here, just based on kind of the height of the teeth, and the Jeep one has a little bit of a nub on the top. So if you threw the roll pin back in, that's the gap we got. But we do need to push it down a little bit further, basically 0.15. We got to heat this up and drive this down just a little bit shorter. That'll push that guy out. And then that'll let us know where this hole is going to land. That'll give us the right dimension from this flange down to this tip. And then from there, we've got to figure out just what we need for a spacer. It came, like I say, with this like brass spacer and then the typical small shims, kind of like you'd have to space out your distributor. I do have like this guy here. He's about 1/8 of an inch. So he's not quite what we need. He's a little bit too small. But that gives you the rough idea of what we need to do. The nice thing is I got to kind of cut one out anyway, so we can probably get rid of this copper washer, that brassy looking one. And then we can run whatever thin one we need for the proper tolerances, and then we can just run a spacer. It'll be a little bit more than that, so basically add 0.12. So it's just going to be about like that, which isn't too crazy. Basically just cut a block out of something like this. But first things first, get this guy so I don't lose him. And should be able to take this guy out in the garage with the old heating torch. He's got a, there it goes. think there's one more on there. There's two on the top. Come on off. I don't want to lose that out in the garage. Come on, there you go. Yeah, so there's two, actually three. So they got a small shim and a normal one, and then a big flat washer on the top. So we'll put him on the bench. But we should be able to heat him up, give him just a little knock with a hammer, and it should let that slide up, and when it cools down, she seats again. The one I had on the rig, they actually had a roll pin through here, but if I look at this guy, he doesn't. So I'm not sure what they have. I guess we'll find out when we give her a knock. Like I say, when I did the last one, basically, even without the roll pin out, she was still stuck. So you heat up the aluminum, it expands, and you can kind of give her a little bit of a tap, and then she'll slide. So they might have figured out that they don't need to even bother with that roll pin. So we'll get you on the rack, see if we can get this pushed down. So before we head out, good to grab some measurements. If you take the old calipers, nothing of these have to be super precise. We're sitting at about 0.84. We need to drive this guy down a little bit. So the 0.15 that we need, if you take that off, basically we're going to have to reset this to Oops, come on, little friend. If we set him to 0.69, that gives us what we'll need to keep sticking out, so you can get an idea of, it's not a ton, but it's just enough to knock that back in. So we'll get this guy heated up, we'll have this guy ready to go, we can see if we can get her in the right dimension.
Oh, that was a pretty good guess.
Yeah, so you can see just a little bit she slid. So got this shaft tweaked. Doesn't take a lot of heat, just enough to get this to flare out. You can see the kind of the witness mark there probably of where she slid up to about the 125. Doesn't take a lot of heat. It is just a press fit. The one that I had on the rig originally, a little older, did have a roll pin in there. It seems like they have switched to just doing a press fit, which is fine. It's not going anywhere, so it works. Threw the two washers back on that were up top here. Threw the washer back on the bottom. Got our gear that fits. If you run the calipers, we do get our 0.47 or 4.75 from tip to flange here. There is a fiber washer that runs, but that's the distance we're looking for, so the fiber washer will pick up a little bit. But past that, we've basically got to take up this space now. So if you put the roll pin just kind of hanging in there, I don't feel like driving her home. I don't know if I got anything better. That'll work. We're basically looking right at 0.38 to cut out of this guy to get her dialed in. We can fine tune it with kind of different washers to get the right shim tolerances, but he's the right fit for that. That's a little bit long. We'll go get her chalked up, rip out a 0.38 spacer for this particular gear. Other gears may be different. There is a little bit of variance, like some will have that nub on the top. yada, yada, yada. So spacer size is going to be different for what you need. That 0.4, the 4.75 is probably the one that's most interesting to anybody following along. So anywho, be right back with the spacer. Well, there she be. So nip that guy out about 0.38. Again, kind of specific to this gear. So there we can kind of see holes lining up about where she should. Should have the right dimensions from our tip to our tail. So really the only thing left that we should have to do is grease her up and check our gaps. You don't want her super snug, just a real little bit of end play there. But that's going to depend on how either one of these roll pins sits in there. They're just ones I got. But anywho, we'll get that tapped in, get her greased up, and see how she fits. Well, there she be. So I got the spacer in there. Got the spiral pin back in. Just a real little bit of a click, just real light tolerances there. So got a little bit of end play so she's not too snug. Spins nice and smooth. Should be able to just dunk the lid back on. Screws line up. Basically it only goes one way. There's 2 screw holes and then a notch for the rotor. So not too much to that. Boink, if I tip you up a little bit. I bet it's this guy. Yep. Just so we don't lose our parts. Boink. So, like I said before, so this nub sticks out just 1/8 of an inch less. There's still plenty to hold that rotor on. It's not like it's gonna go anywhere. They gave you plenty of room. So that rotor still snaps on, still in the same spot. And we should be able to throw this guy back on. He's got a notch. Which is here. So he only wants to go one way. Just like that. Zippity-doo him on there so we don't lose that. That'll keep the rotor and cap and everything else all together. I think those screws are captive, so you can't really lose the Allen bolts. But anywho. Hey. Come on. Get in there. So that's the OEM one. That is the Hyperspark. Now with a 2F gear and a 2F spacing. Like I say, she's a little bit taller than what we started with. So I'll give you a 4.75. You can kind of see how she matches up now with the Toyota one, or I guess if you probably easier this way. So if you go from here to here, you can see how this nub matches up where it would have sat on the block. So it basically gives you that same dimension. So we did have to space her down that little bit. Like I say, some of the HEIs you can kind of see have that same kind of goofy spaced down gear. So I would wager they do a similar exercise with some of the stock GM ones. I have not gotten my mitts or any detailed information on the Chevy i6 one. This is the Jeep 235. It's that 565307. The BK is for black. They make one in silver. Pick your poison. So that's what this one is. Otherwise, once you turn this shaft down, the gear will fit. She'll fit in the oil pump. And if you space that top collar down, or up a little bit, I guess, which pushes the shaft down, you've got the right dimensions for this to sit in the oil pump. You can see how the factory one where she rode. So you can't be short there. You will not have oil. And that'll give you the right dimensions as far as where the gear sits on the cam. So not super crazy, but it is what it is. Until Holly makes them for the 2F, that is probably what you'll have to do if you want to run full digital ignition with these distributors. You can get an MSD that might fit. I don't know. I've seen that you basically have to do the same stuff. So these are pretty simple, pretty easy to work on. If you want the full Hyperspark experience on a 2F, that's probably what you'll need. Anywho, thanks for riding along. Hopefully that helps, and we'll catch you on the next one.